Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome back to the Chaplaincy on the Go podcast. My name's Josh Zorhoff, and I am a teaching pastor and a therapist in the West Michigan area. And this podcast is brought to you by the Fearless family of churches. I'm excited to continue on in this conversation about addiction and how we find ourselves in different seasons of life, journeying through the reality of addiction. If you know someone who is in the process of addiction or on the road to recovery, or you yourself are on the bubble of maybe a habit or a hang up or an addiction, we're hoping that this will be a helpful conversation with you today. Joining me for the podcast are some really dear friends of mine, Ben and Carolyn Reuschel, and they have a lot to share about their own journey and their own understanding of how complicated addiction can be. Ben, Carolyn, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
I was super excited, Carolyn. We should say that that in a lot of ways, this is never fun to talk about, but it's so important. And we should also say that Ben and Carolyn are parents and they have children in the home who are right now watching MacGyver, the only MacGyver, the one for those of us who are in our 40s, the one we grew up with. And there could be something crazy that happens. Maybe they want to try a MacGyver thing. I don't know. We could see some duct tape fly by. I don't know. But just for those of you who are listening in, they've got kids at home. And so we don't know where this is going to go, but we're going to do this anyway. And we're going to dive right in. Tell us a little bit about who you are. Tell us about your family. Tell us about what you do and all of the things.
Hi. Yeah. Well, I'm Ben. I have been married to Carolyn for 16 years. We live in the area of the Fearless churches in West Michigan, both born and raised in this same area. We have 3 boys, 11, 10, and 7. Our house is sticky and violent.
Busy.
Yeah. But fun. They keep us busy. And we stay busy with house projects. We live in a very old and cold farmhouse in a cornfield. And I'm a police officer locally and wear a lot of hats there. Carolyn can tell you about her profession.
Yeah, I'm a tax manager at a corporation here in town. So do corporate taxes for a living. Very exciting. Someone has to have a stable, normal job.
Someone has to. It's so funny. I was talking to somebody today and I said, "How are you?" And she said, "My life is full and frenzied and furious." And I was like, I deeply resonate those words.
Yeah.
Yes. So you've told us a bit about your jobs. You've told us a little bit about your family, but we're here to talk about addiction. And you know that journey keenly. And so I'm actually going to kick it over to you, Ben, to start and give you a chance to tell us what that journey's been like for you. And also, Carolyn, if you have a thought, just
Sure.
let us know. So, because we'll have plenty of time to chat through that too.
Okay.
Sounds good. Well, I'm Ben. I'm an alcoholic. If you're listening for something else,
Hi, Ben.
you can move on. So as I'll share my story, humbly, not at all prideful or proud of anything part of it. At the same time, I kind of usually say I'm an agnostic alcoholic, meaning I'm neither proud nor ashamed. It is who I am and what I am, but made in the image of God. I'm thankful to be alive and sober and 2 years and 3 months sober, to be exact. And also, I guess, as I share, listeners listen for similarities rather than differences. It's easy to be like, oh, I'm not that way, or that was not me. And that's fair. In recovery, we end up finding a lot in common with where people have been. So if that's helpful. I was raised in a very wonderful, supportive, stable family. Not drinkers even socially. Basically, didn't have any association with alcohol. Didn't drink till I was 21. Just wasn't a important part of my upbringing. And even the early years, right out of high school, I started as a police cadet with a local department that I work with now, and really saw the negative effects of alcohol at 19. So for those first years, I was really caught up in the job and wanting to do that as a profession, and saw how people ended up in jail and with broken homes. And ironically, like, that was just something that wasn't a part of anything I wanted for my life, especially at the time. I also lived at home, was able to work 2 jobs as well. So I stayed busy and also stayed away from that kind of social environment of college, other than just playing basketball and going to school. It was basically my hobbies outside of work. So right out of college, I was hired as a police officer. And then through my 20s, and we got married, or at the start of that as well. We had met in college. And even as I turned 21 and she did, wasn't a big part of our relationship. As it grew, as I grew up, I guess, I can't specifically say there was one like starting moment where it was like, I need to depend on this. It was certainly gradual, where over the course of years, it became a problem. It was kind of marked by, we'd call them like episodes, was like a safe way and a happy way to call it, where those were maybe once or twice a year things. And then it was 3 or 4 times a year. And now over the course of 15 years, starting in the 20s or the late teens, it's maybe now twice a month. And that is situations where I was drinking too much, typically by myself, but also in social interactions. And as we were young in marriage, we were able to function kind of together with drinking, and that was okay. Gradually, over the course of years, I lost some privileges as far as what we would have in the house, from like freezer whiskey and vodka to, okay, now we're just sipping whiskey or bourbon, to always having a case of beer, to having smaller amounts of higher quality beer. And that worked for a while. As I can see, looking back, it didn't last. And part of, I think, your last addiction podcast mentioned like some not really co-occurring, but I began hiding it or buying it like on the side. So I'd have some hidden somewhere and still be able to drink casually or socially with her, but I would have 1 or 2 or 4 in me before she got home.
Bonus beverages.
Right. Right. And like I said, I lost privileges, but alcoholics will find a way, from using the credit card to now I can't use a credit card, or I'll have to go to a gas station that has it. And there's ways that I was able to hide the transactions to eventually using cash almost exclusively.
Don't give tips.
They'll find their way.
I don't need tips.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I said, it didn't specifically affect my job. I didn't crash a police car. I wasn't showing up drunk or even hungover. On the outside, you could say I had enough control that I would drink on my days off, and on my work days, if I did drink at night and had 2 to 4, that wasn't anything unusual or problematic. And then really, as far as Carolyn knew, I hadn't been drinking really on my days off either. So, in my experience as a police officer, has not been positive with those in either alcoholism or in recovery or any type of addiction. I'm honestly not opening myself up to really pay attention to that. I didn't have any good stories of this person's an alcoholic and they're in recovery. For me, I was within reason able to control when I would start. However, I could not control the finish. And that's part of what the disease is. The dopamine system gets hijacked, and there's those neural pathways we talk about that it becomes reflexive. And I own that. Whether it was how it was brought on, I don't know, but I take responsibility for it. And yeah, the path for the past 2 years and 4 months.
So I should say thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome.
I know that's not easy. In every story, there's a catalyzing moment. What was that like for you?
It was hard. The fall of 21 or end of summer 21. At that point, I was in the solid grip, I would say, of it, where even the times that I could control it, and I use air quotes on that, and have 4 drinks on my day off, that was becoming more than that. Part of my personality or not, I was somewhat in control of what I would buy and how I would consume it. Literally a measuring cup, measuring ounces, knowing kind of where I was. And part of that was the Dutchman in me to make it last. And then all of a sudden, the blackout would happen. And how did this happen on a Tuesday? And not opening up to anybody about it, lying to Carolyn about how my behavior had kind of suddenly changed, caused her great concern, actually, that I was having some type of medical event.
Well, because at that time, it had become enough of a problem that you'd agreed to stop drinking altogether. So me being probably somewhat naive, probably wanting to believe what I wanted to believe, believed him. So when he told me he wasn't drinking, but was certainly acting not normal, I just thought that something else was wrong.
Yeah.
In hindsight, I just have to give myself grace for that period of time. Not great judgment, but it is what it is. So yeah, that's where some of
let's talk about that for a minute. Like, yes, you need to give yourself grace. I mean, that we all do.
Mhm.
Cool. But you believe the best in your husband.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not bad. And even at a minimum, you didn't want to believe the worst.
Right.
And that's part of this conversation. I mean, I just even the interaction, I wrote down tips and lies, like question mark of, there's this whole thing of like, don't tell people how they can get away with this. What are you thinking?
Yeah.
And because the challenge is like, but there's the flip side of it is there might be women or men, let's not gender stereotype in this. There may be spouses listening that are like, yeah, I don't ask him about the cash.
Mm.
I should probably do that
Mm.
because unfortunately, and it really doesn't matter what addiction it is,
Mhm.
hiding goes hand in hand with the habits that we don't want people to know about.
Yeah.
And it's funny, because in some ways, people who struggle with addictions are remarkable truth tellers. They just tell the truth with their behavior and not with their words.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, I mean, I think that's just a really important part of it, Carolyn, because you have the side of being a spouse through all of this. And this didn't happen overnight.
No.
Through a whole progression. I mean, Ben even said it. It's like, yeah, I mean, I used to have vodka, or I used to have this, and it changed to this, and it changed to this. So, I mean, at a fundamental level, there was always something there, but you also were on a journey with it. You were like, what is it, the frog in the frying pan at the same time? Like you were
Yeah.
just adjusting to
Yep.
whatever that was. So, I mean, what's that? What's that journey of being a spouse through all of that? What's that been like for you?
Yeah. So I would say, I mean, super challenging, right? Scary. There were, I guess, leading up to Ben getting help, it was a constant state of chaos. I didn't know what I was going to come home from work to. I didn't know which Ben I was going to see at night. Um, I couldn't trust him for just basic partner needs. I made sure I would get home earlier so I could be there when kids got off the bus. Like just things that you shouldn't have to worry about, but I did. Like it was hard. And I mean, I know a lot more now about it all than I did when I was going through it. I really, really didn't know what we were facing. So with that perspective, yeah, there are certainly things I would have done different had I known. I wouldn't have covered for him so much. I would have been more skeptical. All those things. That doesn't really matter. Point is, it was hard leading up to recovery, and it was hard in recovery, if I'm being perfectly honest. Yeah, I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Well, I mean, well, before we, I mean, yes, we should talk about recovery. Like my friend Alex, who was on the podcast, the episode that just, the one before this one, how about that? He said, the reality is that recovery is not a destination.
Mm-mm.
You're not, there's no such thing as a recovered alcoholic or a recovered addict. You're always in recovery.
Yeah.
But before
Yeah.
we get into that, I remember, it was probably a year ago, Carolyn. I don't know if you remember this or not, but it was at church and we were talking about how things were going, and you said something that I've not been able to forget. You said, it's kind of unfair that Ben did all this stuff and now he's in recovery and we can celebrate that. But like, I didn't do all of this stuff. And it's not actually really fair to be the spouse of someone who's in recovery.
So the point of that is also, yes, Ben made these choices. He has an addiction. It's a disease, like there's some of that wasn't driven by Ben, and some that is, I know now, disease, and it wasn't, like personal attacks on me or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyways, whatever led up to the recovery. And then in recovery, he was able to get so much help and just so many people rallied around him, so much support. What I found unfair for a long time was all of that happened to me. Like I didn't do anything to bring that chaos into my life, into our home.
Right.
And then I still had have a journey of reconciling what happened and letting go of resentment and personal growth and healing. Like that has also been really hard on this recovery journey.
Yeah.
I naively thought once alcohol is out of the picture, it's going to be clear sailing. Like I knew it would be hard for Ben to not drink. I didn't realize how much work was going to go into living different, just every day. Like our relationship. Yeah. And when the truth finally comes out, and you start looking at the past with these like different lenses, it brings up so much hurt and anger that I didn't even really know was there. And so wrestling with all of that just took a long time. I mean, we're, like Ben said, almost 2.5 years into the recovery path. And I feel like it was probably recent, within the last 6 months, that I thought, I think I feel okay. Like, I think I feel like we're good. And it just took a long time.
There were just so many more resources for Ben than there were for you.
Yeah.
And there's so much more support. And I think you're like, that's unfair. And you have to name that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, how do you navigate that? And I say part of that because I don't know who's listening, but I can imagine that due to the dialogue and the discussion and the label of this podcast, there's probably a handful of people listening that are like, amen to that.
Sure.
Because I remember talking to you too early on, and you were listening to podcasts and you were reading books, and you were like, it's like these people can read my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had to look for that. Like I didn't know where to go for that. I knew I'd heard of Al-Anon.
Yeah.
I didn't start going to that until Ben had been sober almost a year. So that is something that would have been very helpful early on, and even during his active use time. But you don't know what you don't know. And
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also, the whole recovery piece, it just felt like one more thing that I needed to do, that it wasn't a choice I made to be in this situation. But
that was forced on you. What were some of the recovery challenges as you look back and as you look forward? Like what are the big ones?
So the biggest hurdle for me was the actual, like, saying it out loud and admitting it, and even Carolyn identifying it.
Step 5 for all of you, those who don't know. Did you know, just incidentally, 90% of people who go into the 12-step program never make it past step 4. Step 5, confession, is the hardest. Sorry, continue.
No. So, and for me, the quitting part and getting help started with a detox program through Pine Rest, which is a local, quite large mental health and substance abuse treatment facility, which I didn't know at the time. Didn't do enough homework. It was a 5-day inpatient for me, it was a hard decision to make. I knew within hours of being there that it was the right decision, and learned just so much about the community that's out there for those in recovery, and also how difficult it is. The nurses are asking if this is your first time. Of course it is. Do people come back to this? And not knowing that, yeah, like there's almost punch cards that some people have to come back there. I took it seriously, and that's no slight on anyone else. So the recovery started with making a hard decision to do that. But without it, I wouldn't have had the tools, and I wouldn't have had the vulnerability amongst my wife, but family and coworkers to be like, this is why I'm out of pocket for, who knows how long.
Yeah.
And if it was just a matter for me, I think of trying to even just go to meetings locally. I don't think that would have been good enough for my recovery. Alcoholics, and not just myself, were master manipulators. That's part of the reason Carolyn hurts so
Really
much.
good at hiding.
That's what we do, and we can turn things around to work in our favor. And it's not something I'm proud of at all, but it didn't make her job any easier.
Yeah.
And then, in addition to the detox, I was a part of some outpatient intensive IOP programs, which was 3 hours a night for 6 weeks.
3 nights a week.
3 nights a week, 6 p.m. to bedtime. So I'm
Past
past bedtime for the kids. So I'm eating early dinners, sometimes by myself, not putting the kids to bed. And that, like I said, carried on for 6 weeks. Everything else, the meetings, seeing counselors, driving across West Michigan, filled up my days and took me away from being necessarily the family thing that needed to be done for her, that she shouldered again for the additional months of that early recovery. Right. Important, obviously, to my recovery, but just in time, it caught up with us as far as our relationship and the stress that she'd been under for now years, and especially the last few months.
Yeah, she paid dearly for your addiction, and then paid dearly for your recovery.
Yeah. And at the time, I mean, I was just so thankful that he wasn't drinking. I was, I think, pretty supportive of anything that he wanted to do to ensure that he wouldn't relapse. I mean, the stats on that are sobering, for lack of a better word.
Pun intended.
Yeah, pun intended. I think it's 3% of people in recovery actually make it through the first year, something like that. It's bad. So that was really scary for both of us, and we truly did not want that to happen. So I was just thankful that he was putting in all that effort, even though it was hard and it was extra again on my plate. But it's hard to look back and think that we should have done anything different in that time, because he's here now 2 years, 3 months, 19 days sober. He just pulled it up on his phone. So patience, took a lot of patience and just trusting the process.
Yeah, that, I think that ties in a little bit to this question that I think is really important to talk through and for people to hear. What did you do to build back trust and build back your relationship?
Yeah.
There's no going back to the way things were.
No. So the first thing we did was when Ben got released from Pine Rest, before he came back home, Ben and I and you, Josh, sat down and had a little chat on how do we move forward from here. So we kind of came up with a list of things that we could do and couldn't do. You told us that we couldn't be sarcastic anymore, and we're not good at that. We're still pretty sarcastic people. So that one aside, I think we've done good on everything else. So a couple ideas that we had to build back trust are just some low-hanging fruit. So obviously Ben's a cop. He has access to breathalyzers. You can buy one on Amazon. So every day he was doing a breathalyzer for me to prove that it was all zeros, no questions asked. It was a very tangible piece of evidence to just basically get a baseline again of what is sober Ben. It's been years since it's been like days without drinking, right? So that was an easy one. Credit card receipts. We had this debate because he had some time off work. So we're like, okay, well now Ben can like go get groceries and do these things to like help out a little bit. However, that gives him access to stores with alcohol. And so then that became tricky. So he just turned in basically all his receipts to me, which was a shift. We don't operate that way with each other, and don't anymore. But for a period of time, it was very important. So he gave me all his credit card receipts. I could see what he was spending money on, where he was going. He didn't keep any cash. I don't even know that you had a debit card for a little while. Like, I'm not sure that there was a way to get cash. I mean, I'm sure there was a way, but I don't believe that he was. So he didn't have any cash. What were some other things that we did?
One of the most humbling experiences was going to get groceries once at Aldi. And my Forerunner had been stripped of all change and cash, and having to wait until I could get a quarter from somebody because I didn't have one. And it's one of those reminders of, yep, you earned it, Ben.
That's
be humble. And so one of the recovery things we talk about is it's an honest-based program. Our secrets keep us sick. Just being honest with her in the little things all the time. Committing to, if I say this, I'm going to do that. The analogy of making small deposits over time. And there's no magic wand to wave. You can't fast forward 2 months, 3 months, a year.
Yeah.
And you still have not necessarily lapses in my case, use, but I don't know if something came up where I wasn't completely honest about something, whether as innocent as it could be, or I didn't get something done, that could be 2 or 3 steps backwards. And my understanding is I earned all this, and I have to deal with it, and her recovery is on her timetable. And a drink for me isn't going to make it better anyway. And this is part of the picking up the pieces. Sobriety doesn't make the problems go away. The consequences are there. And it's something to learn from. I'm going to drive the lesson home, as painful as it can be.
Yeah. And the trust building thing, it is so gradual. And I do think, and this is probably true with any relationship. I mean, as soon as there's anything that breaks trust, kind of that blanket level trust that you think that you should be able to have with a spouse someday, is gone, and you may never get that back. So there's probably always going to be a little bit of like reserved piece there because we're humans, and that's the reality of living in a sinful world and broken world. However, it is possible to get a lot of that back, and I'm grateful that is where we are now. One other thing that helped us, I guess, well, I don't even know if it helped us, but I can overthink things if I'm not okay. So if I'm trying to figure out how to say this. So if Ben, I can tell when he's thinking something or he's in his head with something, and he's not if he's not talking to me, I immediately think that something is wrong like that. And I don't know what it is, but I can go out on a tangent in my own head and come up with some scenarios. I don't think I'm alone in that. One thing we've had to get better at is me saying when I'm feeling that. And then it could be the stupidest thing that he's thinking about in his head. Like, well, I'm trying to figure out if I have 3 2x4s and I'm trying to build this one thing, do I have to go to the store? Like it could be something so dumb. But if he just tells me that, I feel better, right? Just because I know what's going on. Whereas Ben operates under, she doesn't need to know this. Why does it matter? But for someone who's lost trust and is trying to get it back, I want to know if he's thinking about something that he did that he's trying not to tell me about, or if he's worried that I'm going to find something, or, so just being able to talk, like openly communicate with each other and just be honest with some of that stuff was something that we needed to grow in also. That's not going to be the case for everybody, but that was a struggle for us.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. Because I think that should be the case for everybody. And I appreciate you saying that. Now, it might not be the case because not everybody is facing a one-side, relationship piece of addiction or something like that. But the truth is, I mean, I look at Christy sometimes and she's like off in her own world. And I'm like, hey, what are you thinking about? And if she looks at me and says, nothing, that's not true.
It's not true. Yeah.
And we've had to navigate that too of like, I'm asking because I care and I want to know. And I've learned over the course of our marriage that if she says nothing, then I ask again. And if she says nothing again, then I ask again. I say, are you sure? Because it seems like there's something there. And it's not because I'm trying to interrogate, or it's not because I'm trying to cause frustration.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to know. I want to know.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you can do that, the more you get to share, get to learn, get to grow, and your relationship can thrive.
Yeah.
So I like that. I think it's good. I think for anybody listening, you should do that. It's a good practice. What, as we wrap up here, what is something for people listening that are either, they are either thinking, yep, this is probably us, or I know this is us, or, oh man, like, why are they in my head? What can you say that is hopeful or helpful to them?
So I would certainly like to share that life without alcohol can be normal and good and okay. One of my hangups in getting help or quitting was I thought that everything would change. I think the analogy is holding on to one thing and losing everything versus giving up the one thing and getting everything, or however you want to look at it. There's so much normalcy that can come back into healthy normalcy. And you can still have relationships with people and family and events. There's ways and tricks and help and things to help work through that. But it doesn't, hanging on to alcohol as a coping mechanism or as whatever or any type of addiction. There is help out there in there is so much. It just has to get brought to light and shared with somebody. And starting with someone close, doesn't even have to be your spouse, I guess, right away. It can get to that. And sharing your emotions type of thing. That's it's a muscle you get. Those neural pathways get built up too when you're sharing your emotion or sharing something hard. So the more habit you create of doing that, whether that's with a counselor, or a group or your spouse or your family or friends, the easier that just becomes. And as an internal processor that I am, it's not always easy. Kind of the agreement that we have is if I am legitimately my thoughts, sometimes I can't put into words, whether it's just work, emotion. But our agreement is I will give you an answer within a window of time by this evening, this afternoon. But I'm just kind of spinning right now, or I'm thinking about something else. I appreciate your concern, but I don't have words for it right now. So, but back to getting help is just letting somebody know and reaching out. There is incredible strength in the recovery in the groups. I'm an advocate for Alcoholics Anonymous. And even the advantage of that being anonymous, there's a risk of showing up to a meeting and finding somebody you know, which is actually a blessing, but
not a bad thing.
If you can go to a group, and that was one thing I actually had a hard time with, was because I would share with these strangers my thoughts and emotions and my struggles. And I'd come back home and Carolyn, at the end of her day, want to know what I was thinking about. And I was like, I just told everybody. Remembering that, oh yeah, I need to share that with her too.
Right.
It's a safe place. You can dump what your hang up is. And everybody, it stays there and you leave. It doesn't mean, again, your problems are solved or they're going away, but
right. But it's
there's a community there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Carolyn, what about you?
Yeah, I would echo just talk to someone about it. I mean, I lived in isolation for a long time about what my fears were when Ben was in active use and concerns and like knowing that something wasn't right, but I had some people I could talk to about it, but I still feel like I didn't share all of it until I got closer to the end. And then it was like, yeah, this is bad. This is not normal. What do I do? So just being able to say that to someone and not walk it alone is big. I think, being removed from it a little bit now, there is so much hope that can be had. And for me as I don't know, so I'm pretty social. I do still have drinks from time to time. Like I had to change a lot of how I operated at home and with Ben, but it didn't have to completely change me either. I mean, I can get to a point now where I can have a glass of wine if we go out for dinner and Ben's fine with it. And it's okay. Like we had to tread that very carefully for a while. And there are still some things that I do differently now than I did 3 years ago. But it didn't have to mean that I could never drink again either. Right. I don't know if that's helpful for anybody, but that was something I certainly struggled with for quite a long time.
I think that's really important to say. I think too, the other thing is that you guys talked about it and Ben's okay with it. Listen, like there are some people that I know, they can't be around it. They can't smell it. They're too triggered. They are too triggered by all of it. And that is one side. And then there's another where it's like, no, I'm okay with it. Like, but please don't make that assumption for me.
Right.
Let me talk about it. Let me share about it. And I think that even comes back, Ben, to the earliest thing you said of like, hey, my experience might not be your experience. And that's okay because I'm not an addict. I'm a human who has addiction problems and you're a human who may have different addiction problems.
Yeah.
And so like not assuming, not judging, but just like, let's be honest. Let's just be honest about this.
Yeah. And one part of that too, a tangent maybe a little bit, is we talked about how to try to model healthy relationships with alcohol for our kids. The 3 boys, they were all in elementary school or younger when this initially happened when like rock bottom hit. So there's parts that our oldest remembers a little bit, and maybe even our middle, the youngest has no idea really. So you have to kind of teach what that looks like on a healthy level. Like we didn't want alcohol to become this huge taboo issue, because then they go to a family gathering and their uncles are having a beer and they think they're bad people. That's not true. They're fine.
Or they go to college and they're invited into a party and it's like, well, I never got to do this and I'm going to live it up. And no, I mean, that's true. I mean, that's a whole nother podcast about how do you model this for your kids and how do you talk about this? And, maybe we'll talk about that. Maybe we'll talk about that in another episode. But that's such an important thing too, of like, and I can't stress this enough for people who are listening. Your addiction is not just your addiction. Like if you have a spouse or family or kids, it is theirs too in some way, except they didn't choose it. And so like whatever chaos you cause because of it, you have to do the work of like at least repairing to the best of your ability that chaos and talking about it. And so like, it's not just your thing. It's not just your thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're as open as appropriate with our kids. I think about it. I mean, they know Ben can't have alcohol and they see me drink sometimes and it's fine. We just don't make it a big deal. And we kind of say, Dad can't have alcohol, just like your friend Joey can't have gluten. Like, I mean, overly simplified, but
pretty straightforward. It's not
pretty straightforward. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that so much. I appreciate your time. And I know, it's getting on dinner time. I would think, but if it's not, and the kids are done watching MacGyver, then it's going to get crazy up in your house.
Yeah.
And I'm just so thankful for the time that you spent with me and with us as we listen. For those of you listening, if this has been helpful and, you have some questions, reach out chaplaincy@fearlessfollower.org. I know Ben and Carolyn well, and they love conversation. Well, they don't love conversations like this, but they believe in, they believe Carolyn would have loved to have someone like her when she was going through it. And so they love conversations like this and they want to help and I want to help. And so reach out. We'd love to connect with you. And if this would be helpful for somebody else, just share this podcast with them. And we'd love to continue this conversation. Join us next time as we actually engage in another conversation about raising emotionally and strong boys. And that is going to be really great. We've got David Thomas has agreed to talk on the podcast. And so we're going to dive into that. Carolyn, I know you are a big fan.
So excited.
Big fan of his work. And so we are going to continue this conversation and you'll hear some themes and hues even of addiction as we enter into that. So that's all we've got. And we will talk to you later.